Welcome to the Leaderonomics show. I'm with Langdon Morris, co-founder and also senior partner at InnovationLabs. Langdon, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you here in Malaysia.
Thank you very much.
You're here, K Pinta brought you out here, and you're teaching a course.
Taking a course on innovation for small business leaders.
Okay. But you know, before we get into that and before we get into talking about how you help bring innovation to small businesses, let's talk about yourself. And you've got a pretty interesting background.
It's a little bit unusual, yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about that, and tell us, you know, I know you even do some, you know, teach a little bit in universities and like a visiting professor. Yet you never really had, you know, finished college. Talk us through that and tell us how you became such a well-known consultant.
First, we have to clarify. I'm not recommending to anybody that they do what we did.
Just like Steve Jobs and
exactly.
Bill
Well,
Gates,
Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Larry Ellison, all Frank Lloyd Wright, none finished college. So actually, my dad was an architect, and I started working for him when I was about 10. So, you know, and after school, evening, summers, that kind of thing. And I worked for him for about 10 years. And at that time, you could become an architect without going to college. And so I was very interested in doing that. And it was the late 60s, early 70s, so a lot of social turmoil.
Well, you look 25, so.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm 27, actually, so just a little older than you thought. But it was an unsettled time in the world and in the U.S. And so I thought I could make an interesting life without going to college and spending another 4 years after the 12 years I had spent in school. And so, as it turned out, you could.
So what transpired? So you became an architect?
Well, so I worked in architecture for a while, and I was working on an architectural project which the people owned some businesses. And so we were doing architecture in the businesses, and I got very interested in the businesses and how the businesses were evolving. And so from that, I sort of gradually morphed into being a consultant. So I was the junior partner. I was the guy carrying the suitcases for everybody else.
This was when you guys started the firm, or?
No, this is long before that.
Okay.
Yeah, this is, I'm talking 40 years ago.
Okay.
And so I worked in a consulting firm for a while and found it interesting and decided that that's what I wanted to do. So I started my own firm and ran that. And you know, with a small business, it's ups and downs, right? So sometimes things are great, sometimes not so great. And I had met a couple of colleagues along the way, and they had also their businesses and similar experiences. And so we got together to create a consulting firm because we thought it would be more fun, more lucrative, more educational for us, and a more stable lifestyle.
So this was in 2001?
In 2001.
When you started InnovationLabs?
We started InnovationLabs in 2001.
So there's 4 of you, today there's 1 of you, right?
Yeah,
so talk us through that story.
Well, so we did well. We got a lot of very interesting clients. We worked around the world. We worked for small companies, big companies.
And what did you guys do?
Well, so we're innovation consultants. So that means 2 things, really. Helping companies solve very complex business problems, and helping them set up innovation to teams, groups, departments, et cetera. So sometimes clients hire us to design their innovation department or to fix it if it's not working as well as it should be. And sometimes they hire us to solve problems. And so we use our innovation toolkit to solve problems, or we teach people how to use the toolkit. Those are the sort of the 2 things that we do.
So what would be an example of a problem that you help solve?
Yeah, interesting. So there's lots to choose from. Maybe I'll tell you a UNICEF story. Everyone thinks UNICEF, right?
Save
Great.
the world.
Yeah, exactly. Save the world, save the children. So one of the diseases that UNICEF is really actively working on is polio. You may or may not know there's only a few countries left in the world where children are still getting polio on a consistent basis. And so UNICEF is working very hard to vaccinate all of the children in those countries. And there are political problems and logistical problems and cultural problems in doing that. But they're determined, and they're working very hard at it. And they realize that the workers, the people who are actually delivering the vaccine, which is oral, so it's not an injection, it's just drops. Most of them do it a couple weeks a year, so they have what they call a campaign. And most of them are illiterate, and they work wherever they work in society. They get recruited for this, but they needed training. And UNICEF developed some training, but they didn't feel it was working very well. And so they wanted us to help basically solve the problem of how do we train illiterate workers who are delivering polio vaccines in a number of countries in Africa and Western Europe, Western Asia. And so we went and did research, and we discovered that the training materials that they were using were completely inappropriate. They weren't communicating at all with the people. And we suggested that maybe a really good way to train people would be to have them read comic books. because they can see the picture. Even if they can't read it, they can see it and they can read it. Maybe one person in the family can read and they can do it together. And so we actually created some comic books to teach polio workers. And now there's hundreds of thousands of people who are using these to train so that they can go and do a better job and hopefully eradicate polio from the world.
Amazing.
So it was a very interesting project. We really loved the work. It was really an honor to be able to work on it. But it also required our innovation skills, because the obvious solutions, the solution that they had in mind when we started, clearly would have never worked. Right? So we were very happy that they chose us, and we were able to explain to them, this is what you had in mind. It probably won't work, and these are the reasons. But what if we tried this and this? So we tested and we tried and we developed and we came up with something that worked.
Oh, fantastic.
So
We're going to take a short break right now. And we'll be right back here on the Leaderonomics Show with Langdon Morris. Welcome back to the Leaderonomics Show. I'm with Langdon Morris. We're talking about innovation. It's a word that everybody uses loosely. Innovate this, that. I'm working on innovation. Everyone seems to be an innovator. What are some of the common myths? Why are a lot of people also fearful of innovation, in spite of it being such a buzzword?
So you just asked me to cover a huge range. Great range there. Well, so buzzwords are myths. First one, people confuse creativity and innovation. It's very important to make a distinction between the two. They're related and they're dependent on each other, but they're different. So the way we understand it, creativity is the process of coming up with ideas. It can happen when you're in the shower, can happen walking down the street, can happen in a conversation. Ideas come when they come, can't be managed. The question for innovation, from an innovation perspective, is what do you do with the ideas, right? Do you figure out which ideas are best, and do you figure out how to take those ideas and do something with them? So our definition of innovation is that it's something of value which is new, but the value is determined not by the creator of the innovation, but by the user or the consumer. Right? So it's an innovation if somebody wants to buy it, or if it provides value to an organization like UNICEF, as we were just talking about. So the definition requires and assumes and understands that it's a transactional thing. There's a customer involved. And the real judgment is ultimately made by the customer. So you and I could say, oh, we're innovating in this and we're innovating in that. Really what we're doing is probably we're being creative in our thinking. But if we take those ideas and apply them some way to create value, business value, profitability, social value, improving society, that's what we mean by innovation. So it's
really about value creation.
It's about value creation, exactly.
And why is innovation fearful to many people? I mean, is it because innovation requires change?
No, I don't think it's about the change. I think it's about the risk. So we call it innovation because we don't know what we're doing. Right? If we knew what we're doing, we'd call it business process or we'd call it engineering.
That's right.
But we don't know. So with that, not knowing is uncertainty, and with uncertainty is risk. So we have an idea. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't work. If it doesn't work, then we've wasted time or money, and that's a risk. And in most organizations, in fact, what happens is if we take a risk and it fails, we get punished. Right? So in the organizational culture of innovation, we have to understand that risk-taking is normal. It's desirable. Smart risk-taking, not stupid risk-taking, but smart risk-taking is desirable. So how do we encourage people and enable them to take the right kind of risks at the right time, which enable us to create the right new stuff?
Yeah, so you're here in Malaysia because K Pinta brought you here to teach a course for small businesses on innovation, right?
Right.
How do small businesses innovate? I mean, they have lack of resources, they have lack of time, they have a whole bunch of constraints that are constraining them from being innovative, right? So what do you teach them?
So we teach them skills. So think about it this way. In a big company, there's probably an innovation department, R&D department, a marketing department. Their job is to figure out the new stuff, right? To figure out how to do the new stuff. A small business has a few people who are busy, overworked, don't have much time, probably don't like to read, not thinking too much about strategy. They're thinking about operations. You know, how am I going to get things working tomorrow, the next day, etc. So when you're in that situation, how do you innovate? And yet, in the back of your mind, what do you know? You know that the world is changing. You know that new competitors are coming, and if we don't evolve our business, if we don't develop, if we don't innovate, then, you know, we're at risk. So it's a paradox or a trap, right? I'm a small business leader. I have to innovate. I don't have time. So what we teach them is a very simple skill set that they can use to learn how to innovate. So literally in the course we teach the skill set and then we practice the skill set. It's not just book learning. It's most of the time we spend doing activities, learning, practicing together. And then it's a 3-day program, but they actually go and do field interviews on the second day. So they talk to employees, they talk to customers, and they learn what types of questions to ask and what to look for. And then on the third day, we sort it out. We figure out what actual innovations are implied or suggested by the work you've done. So then they can take those same skills that we've practiced in 3 short days and apply it to the future of their business.
Yeah. One thing you told me before this interview was about the power of storytelling.
Yeah.
And the importance of it in innovation.
Right.
Talk us through that. Why is it so important, and why must we become better storytellers or good storytellers?
Yeah. Well, so our experience is that people are already very good storytellers, but they don't think of storytelling in terms of business. They think of storytelling in terms of entertainment. Right? Now, like all of us, you were in primary school. Right? I was in primary school. We had math class, we had a science class, we had a social studies class, a language class. I don't remember any of that stuff, right? Facts, figures. But I can tell you about books that I read when I was 10 years old, or movies that I saw when I was 5 years old, because we remember the stories. So the human brain is structured to remember stories and to tell stories. We think beginning, middle, end, challenge, overcoming challenge, good guys, bad guys. That's all part of our natural way of thinking. So if we want innovation to be natural, then we want to teach innovators how to tell stories. And the story that the innovator tells is very simple. There's the old way, that's the existing story, and there's the new way, that's the better story. So what we're teaching in this class is how to figure out what is the better story, how to tell that story in a way that is compelling to yourself, because if you're the leader, you're the decision maker, but also compelling to others, because no matter what you want to do, you have to convince others. It could be your customers, it could be your employees, that this story is the right story, that this is really going to provide some new value or some new insight for you. So the storytelling is important, because if you can tell it in a story, then you can make sense out of it. If you can't articulate it clearly in a story, then you know you're not there yet.
Although sometimes, in business, man, you say, hey, let me tell you a story. People are like, there seems to be a, almost, kind of like putting you down, or it's kind of like, diluting whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So how do we overcome that? I mean, we know the importance of story, yet it's something that businesses seem to neglect. I don't know whether that's the part of the reason why storytelling never really...
I don't know why they would neglect it. So think about, Steve Jobs and all those product introductions that he did.
It's all about stories.
It's a storytelling thing, right? Yeah. Remember, when he did the MacBook Air, right? So they go through the whole, or maybe it's just the Air. They go through the whole presentation. Oh, by the way, somebody brings out an envelope. I've got something new here. He takes the MacBook Air out of the manila envelope. It's like, a computer that small? Or when he introduced the iPhone, right? Or when they introduced Siri. It's just, it's a story. So Jobs was a great storyteller, not only because he could, from the stage, tell the story, but he understood that embodied in the product must be a story, right? So Apple's a great company, obviously. Jobs was a great storyteller. We're still not sure if anybody else has that skill, we're wondering. But if you think about all of the great companies over history, right, there was always a good story in there. So the idea that business people aren't interested in stories, well, it's just too bad for them, because the storytellers are the ones who are going to win.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take another quick break. I'm here with Langdon Morris here on the Leaderonomics Show. Welcome back to the Leaderonomics Show. I'm with Langdon Morris, expert on innovation. But every guest that comes on the Leaderonomics Show gets subjected to our Thinkonomics challenge. So unfortunately, I'm not going to exempt you from that. So you've got about 2 minutes or so on this timer. I'm going to pull a few questions here, and you've got to answer them as fast as possible, right?
Oh, okay.
Let me. So we're going to start the buzzer relatively soon. Okay. Ready?
Yep. All
right. As fast as you can, right? We'll see as many questions as you can get to, right? Okay. Describe what a perfect world would look, feel, and be like.
It would be like Disneyland and the Grand Canyon together. So the best of human and the best of nature.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Do you believe in retirement, and would you retire?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
I will never retire, because I love what I do. I love learning. Retirement to me implies stopping learning, and that would be horrible.
Do you ask enough questions, or do you settle for what you know?
No, I'm off. Innovation's about questions. Are you kidding? We teach people how to ask questions. That's what we do.
Okay. If you could choose an age, how old would you be and why?
And from then on, I can grow, or I stay at that age?
Yeah, I think you can.
Probably about 15.
And then you keep growing it.
Yeah.
And then reverse the loop, right?
Well, I don't know about the loop, but you know, then I'd have a chance to do all the things that I didn't get to do, or do them better, the ones I did before. So.
Will you finish college this time?
I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I wouldn't need to.
All right. Okay. Would relationships be better without technology?
No, I don't think so. Technology adds a whole different dimension. We don't necessarily know how to use technology well, but it's not technology's fault.
Okay. If you knew that everyone you know was going to die tomorrow, who would you visit today?
Oh my God. My family, of course. My wife and kids.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Anyone else?
That would take care of my full day. I only have one day.
Okay, this last one, I think we've got just a little bit. Would you accept advice from a younger person, and why?
I do all the time. I ask them all the time. Yeah. Yeah, I have 2 kids. I'm constantly getting advice from them. Yeah.
All right. You win the challenge.
Cool. do I get a prize?
Yeah, we'll give you a prize. you get a Thinkonomics set.
Awesome.
To take home.
That's great.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about your books, right? You've written a couple of books.
Quite a few.
At least what, 12 books?
10, 12.
Yeah. Talk us through talk us through 1 or 2 of those books, and some of the key insights from there.
Well, so first, why write books at all? So for me, I write books because I want to learn something about a topic. And the best way to learn about it is to try to figure it out in a way that I could tell the story in a book. So the last book that I wrote, I finished last year. Unfortunately, it came up to 700 pages. It's like
that's a short.
Yeah, just read it in the evening is all.
Yep.
Because it turned out it was a really long story. It was a story about the future and how the future is going to be different than the past or the present. And what do we as leaders, business leaders, social leaders need to know about the future in order to make better choices. So the title of the book is Foresight, the Future, and Extreme Creativity. So the argument of the book is we will need to become more and more creative as individuals and as a society in order to have a successful future.
And the book talks about how, right?
The book talks about the major driving forces, the forces that are shaping the world, and the choices that we as people have with regard to each of those forces and what we need to do or should consider thinking about.
You wrote another book called Permanent Innovation, right?
Right.
Talk us through that book and permanent innovation.
Right. Well, so the idea is that it's a contradiction, right? Permanent means stable, solid, fixed, right? So on the cover of the book, it's a picture of a giant skyscraper building, very strong. But the skyscraper is getting hit by lightning, dynamic, changing, fluid. So the challenge is, in an organization, in any organization today, large business, small business, how do you keep the stable structure, cash flow, profitability going, but still adapt and change? And that's the idea of permanent innovation, is you have to maintain a foot sort of in both worlds. So for a leader, it's very challenging, right? Because operational management means stable, predictable. Innovation management means new stuff and change. And you have to do both. It's not an either-or world, it's a both world. And that's true whether you're leading a small business or whether you're leading GE or GM.
Speaking about small businesses, right? If you were in a crowd of, say, 500 CEOs, all of small businesses.
500 CEOs.
100, whatever.
Okay.
But if you had to impart some pearls of wisdom to them, and if you have to give them 1 or 2 key advice as small business owners, right? What advice would you impart to these CEOs?
Good question. I think number 1 would be the world is changing. And if you don't change, your business is not going to be around. Number 2 would be, we talked about before, the process of innovation is a skill. You can learn it, you can practice it, you can get very good at it. It's not something that you have to go to college for. It's not something that you have to study forever for. It's a few very specific things. Most of them you already know how to do. And if you start applying that thinking, then your business will grow and evolve and become hopefully more successful.
I'm sure a lot of our viewers out there are going to say, I want to be like Langdon. I want to be this successful guy who's, built a company and, is kind of going around the world and helping others to be successful, right? Yeah. So if I'm a young person, whether it's graduating from high school or graduating from university and coming out into this world and said, I want to be like him, right? What sort of advice would you give? What sort of nuggets of wisdom would you impart to these kids coming out?
So I actually have an experience like that because I teach a high school class a couple times a year. And so what do I do in the class? I talk the students through the world, because the world is changing. And probably what they're learning in high school doesn't match what's actually happening in the world. So my job is to explain to them, look guys, here's the real deal. This is what's going on. And so for them, for each of them, how can they create the most value in their own lives for their future? And it comes down to one really simple thing. The more education you have, the more choice you have, probably the more money you'll make and the more satisfaction you'll have. So the key is to get more education. That doesn't mean you have to go to college, because I didn't. It means you have to be engaged in learning all the time, right? And when you are, the mindset, learning is just fun, and that's what you want to do. Learning and getting better and learning more skills, it's thrilling and exciting, and it creates choice and options. So that's my advice.
Fabulous. Now I want to end with another book that you wrote, and maybe if you can share just one insight from that book, the Agile Innovation Master Plan.
Right.
Talk us through what that book is all about, and maybe one piece of advice that you can leave with us, or insight you can leave us from that book.
Yeah. So the idea of agile innovation is that agile for us means how fast can you learn. Agile is all about learning, right? So if you can learn fast, then you can develop fast innovations. So agility is learning fast, speed is executing fast. So the book really is just a whole book about how do you learn fast and how do you execute fast. Those are the two things that all business leaders, small and large, need to do.
So I guess your final piece of advice would be that we really, all of us, we need to keep learning, keep growing.
Absolutely.
Keep pushing the boundaries and keep being agile.
Yeah. So if the world didn't change, we could keep doing it the same way we've always done it. But the world is changing faster and faster, and we have to keep up with it if we want to be successful, or if we want to create a better world, which is, of course, what we want to do.
Langdon, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
We've been speaking to Langdon Morris here on the Leaderonomics Show.